Thinning is one of the most important things you need to do in your orchard. And to understand why, it's all about sizing good fruit and getting return bloom the following spring. So something is going on at the base of every cluster of apples. Those flowers have become 5 fruits in the case of this variety, and those 5 fruits represent 50 seeds. When an apple tree produces seeds, it makes a gibberellic acid hormone, which in turn the levels of that help enlarge the fruit cells. Well, increased levels of gibberellic acid also have an impact on the fruit cells that are forming right behind those developing fruitlets, which are going to be the flowers the following spring. And a lot of gibberellic acid ends up suppressing the development of the meristem cells that are meant to become next year's flowers. And so you get into a biennial pattern with heavy bearing trees. One year you have all kinds of apples, the next year there's not an apple to be seen. So what we need to do as orchardists is come in and balance the hormone dynamics of the tree so it can have both a crop this year and flowers next year. A grower has 35 to 40 days after petal fall to get this job done in order to have a positive effect on next year's return bloom. Now, the bottom of the tree is quite easy to do. In fact, it's very beautiful and meditative work. It's a great place to escape from the deer flies as you move in and out of the branches. But getting to the tops of the trees, the ladder work, is something that comes about a little bit more slower. So we're up here in the top of this St. Edmund's russet tree, and here you see a cluster of 5 fruits. And the very center one is the king blossom, which has had a 2 to 3 day jump start on the other apples. That's just the way that the cluster of flowers opens so that the tree has some reserves. What I want to do is remove 4 of these fruits, so I leave just that one center apple. Now, if I noticed apple scab or some kind of insect damage had hit that center apple, naturally I'm going to pick the next best looking apple to keep. But by this way, I'm both selecting the best of my fruit, I'm able to have an impact on some of that bug damaged fruit by collecting it and throwing it on the road where it's going to get crushed by tires, and I'm going to gain next year's fruit crop. So again, this is probably the most important work you can do in your orchard to successfully grow a nice crop of apples, peaches. These other fruits don't set flower cells in quite the same way, but growing good-sized fruit means you can't have too many of them. I prefer pinching off the apples when I'm thinning, in part because it's a lot quicker. Other people might prefer using a snips, but you get the sense of how you can just snap it right off the stem. It's not important that you get the stem off. What you're removing, keep this in mind, are those extra seeds, leaving that one apple, which is going to become a beautiful fruit by harvest time. Having established that ground rule for thinning, 1 fruit per cluster, let's look at some occasions where maybe the rules need to shift. One thing that takes place here is to really take enough fruit off the tree is a lot more challenging than you think. A heavily set fruit tree, you might remove as much as 90% of that fruit to get the right amount left behind in order to have the balance that we're looking for. And that means that each fruit left behind is going to have approximately 20 to 25 plus leaves working for it. This is the photosynthesis factory that's going to have enough energy and produce enough photosynthate sugars to make that apple become everything you want it to be. To do that, you need to space the apples out along the branch on the order of 6 to 8 inches apart. And this is where I mean it gets a little bit difficult. So in leaving 1 apple per cluster, you basically are leaving an apple every 3 to 4 inches along the branch. And that's too many fruit to get return bloom for the next year as well. Again, on a heavily set tree. Another exception here is a lightly set tree. And this will be a place where an apple like Cortland just does not tend to set all 5 of those fruitlets. Here, you want to leave 2 apples occasionally on a cluster, ideally 2 that are spread apart so there's less hiding places for bugs in between as the apples start to size. But it's all about having a sense of, I have enough leaves to support that crop. This particular tree, you see the apples, and they're spaced out on that order of about 6 to 8 inches apart. And that's just right to get everything that I want from this tree, both a good crop this year of nice sized fruit, return bloom next year, and all these single apples are very unlikely to be touched by summer moths coming along and larvae feeding on the surface. The thinning has been completed in that immediate 30 days after petal fall. but not every variety has necessarily had enough apples taken off of it. This particular tree is a Gold Rush. Gold Rush sets very heavy, and if too many apples are on the branch, you're not really going to get good size out of this wonderful disease-resistant apple. So let's do a little bit more thinning here, and I'll be able to point out some of the insect damage that I'm seeing at this point. So it's a bit thick right in here, and I'm just going to remove 3 or so of these apples. There's a double one still together. Take this one out. You can see that probably a cuculio had done a feeding sting there. Take this one off the back, and that's pretty good. We've got 5 fruits, enough leaves to support it. We're going to get good size now out of those apples. That's pretty true of the whole tree. Just a few more apples taken off and things will be looking good. Oh, here's a classic example. Those were feeding stings of cuculio caused way back when the apple was the size of a pea. No need to grow that apple out. None of these have any insects inside of them, so I have no qualms at all about throwing them on the ground. Here's a branch where it was thinned a little bit more effectively right from the start. 5 apples, but they're just that much larger than the apples where they're growing tighter together.